Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're going to be looking at tier 6 and 7 of the Japanese horror film Iceberg. And we're on to the bottom half of the iceberg now, so things get much more obscure from here on out. But there are a lot of hidden gems on these bottom tiers, so I'm excited to run through them. There's a ton to get to, so let's not waste any more time. This is the Japanese horror film Iceberg, part 5. Alright, so let's get right into tier 6. The description reads, "We are now leaving what's available in the West. Here are some popular films never released on DVD or Blu-ray outside of Asia." Starting with Teke Teke. Teke Teke is based on a Japanese urban legend about a ghost of a schoolgirl who's said to have fallen onto a railway line where her body was cut in half by a train. She's a vengeful spirit who lurks in urban areas and around train stations at night. Since she no longer has a lower body, she travels on either her hands or elbows, dragging her upper torso and making a scratching or Teke Teke-like sound. If she encounters an individual, she'll chase them and slice them in half at the torso, killing them in such a way that mimics her own disfigurement. So the movie follows several people as they encounter this evil spirit, and I have to say, Teke Teke is very creepy in this movie, mostly because she moves fast. Like really fast. So the fact that she walks using her hands combined with that speed make the chase scenes very tense. The whole concept is pretty cool, and this is just one of those standout Japanese urban legends. Dogra Magra. Dogra Magra is about a man who's put into an asylum after attempting to kill his fiancée. He's examined by two doctors who have a strange philosophy that mental conditions are linked genetically to ancestors who've committed similar crimes. Turns out the man has an ancestor who killed his wife. The man seems to get more and more insane, and the doctors almost treat it as a game, which makes you question who is truly insane here, the doctors or the patients. Mermaid Legend. Mermaid Legend is a film by Toshiharu Ikeda, director of Evil Dead Trap. It was released in 1984 and follows a woman as she seeks revenge. Her husband stood up against an industrial scheme involving pearl diving, and the heads of the company had him murdered. The wife now enters a world of sex and violence, all to avenge her husband's death. The Cinderella Addiction. This one is very interesting because most of this film, particularly the first half, doesn't feel like a horror movie at all, but instead a romance. The story follows Koharu, a young social worker whose life gets turned upside down when a series of terrible things happen to her. Her father's arrested for drunk driving and her house burns down. She ends up saving a drunk man's life. This man, Diago, turns out to be a doctor whose wife passed away years ago, and the two end up hitting it off in what seems like a whirlwind romance. Even Diago's daughter Hikari loves her, and they soon become a family. So I have to get into spoilers on this one, otherwise there wouldn't be much to say about it, and you wouldn't even understand why this is a horror movie. But basically the daughter Hikari ends up being kind of a psycho, becoming increasingly unhinged and implying that she killed another kid. Well, the community finds out about what Hikari did and vandalizes their home. At this point, the families become very protective of each other, and in one of the biggest movie 180s since From Dusk Till Dawn, Diago, who's the school health consultant, administers the yearly flu shots but spikes them with insulin. He kills every other kid in Hikari's school, and the last shots of the film are all of the children's corpses. I mean, what the hell? So yeah, this movie does have some messed up horror, even if it's jammed into the very last few scenes of the movie. Kasane, Beauty and Fate. Kasane is about an ugly, aspiring actress who's bullied for her looks. Her mother was a beautiful actress, and when she passed away, she left her daughter lipstick. Turns out the lipstick is magical, and if she kisses someone while wearing it, she takes on their appearance for a short amount of time. She ends up making a deal with an actress named Nina, who lacks any real talent, by taking on Nina's appearance. But Nina gets jealous and wants to be recognized as herself. So things get dark as jealousy and vanity build up to a horrific finale. The Inugami Family. The Inugami Family is considered a classic in the realm of suspense, releasing in 1976. It begins with tycoon Inugami Sahei passing away, and he unexpectedly leaves the family fortune to outsider Tomeo on the condition that she marry one of the Inugami grandsons, pitting blood against blood. Soon afterwards, members of the family begin to show up dead one by one. Detective Kindaichi Kosuke is called in to investigate the murders, and the truth is slowly revealed as he happens upon years of hidden skeletons in a shocking family secret. It's a legitimately interesting whodunit, but with that 70s J-horror flair. I think this movie has aged well because some of the graininess of the footage and old film techniques make it creepier to me. This one's definitely worth checking out if you're into murder mysteries and family feuds. Occult. Occult was written and directed by Koji Shiraishi, who also directed Noroi the Curse. This is a very similar movie as it's in the same documentary style. It follows a documentary filmmaker, Koji, as he begins to document the aftermath of a mass stabbing in which the culprit killed two people in and injured more, eventually jumping off of a cliff and killing himself. One of the survivors, a man named Ino, had a strange cult-like symbol carved into his back by the stabber. He says he's thankful as in the aftermath he's begun experiencing miracles, including UFO sightings, hearing voices, and witnessing telekinetic phenomenon. Ino further tells the crew that as he was being stabbed, Matsuki told him, "It's your turn," which Ino takes as an imperative to perform a ceremony mandated by God, which he believes was the motive behind the mass stabbings. The director soon learns that Ino is planning on building a bomb and committing suicide on a busy street, and the director agrees to film the plan going into effect. It's a really creepy look into a man's descent into madness and is reminiscent of some actual serial killers like Son of Sam, for instance. The Discarnates. Discarnates follows a lonely man, Harada. His best friend announces that he's going to marry Harada's ex-wife, sending him into a deep depression. He goes to a comedy show where a man from the audience invites him home. The man and his wife have a strong resemblance to Harada's parents, who were killed 30 years prior. He starts to hang out with the couple a lot because of the warmth they exude and the fun times he's having. At the same time, Harada meets a girl in his apartment building who invites him for a drink, and they soon become lovers. One day, Harada realizes that he's begun to exhibit zombie-like features, sunken eyes, pale white skin, and a fully disheveled look. At this point, his girlfriend warns him to stop visiting the couple, telling him they are ghosts who are feeding off of his life energy. Honestly, this one is a little more drama fantasy, but it does have some horror elements. Lovely Devils. Lovely Devils is a film by Nobuhiko Obayashi, who is most famously known for directing House. This movie's not quite as outlandish as House, but still has some crazy moments. It's essentially an evil kid movie, similar to films like The Omen. The film starts on the day of a wedding. The niece of the groom, 5-year-old Alice, tells the bride how lovely her veil is and asks if she can have it. The bride tells her she plans to keep it her whole life as a keepsake, to which this creepy little kid asks if that means she can have it when she dies. Next thing you know, the bride comes tumbling out of the second floor window. So from here on out, it's creepy kid shit with all kinds of bizarre kills and moments. Everything from telekinetic attacks to death by jar. Under Your Bed. Under Your Bed is a creepy thriller with a somewhat familiar premise. It's about a boy, Naoto, who was always ignored in school, which left him completely lonely. A classmate, Chihiro, is the only person to actually know his name, and this leads to Naoto becoming obsessed with her. This obsession continues into adulthood and slowly becomes more and more disturbing. Eventually, this leads to Naoto sneaking into her apartment and hiding under her bed. What's scarier than the stalker, however, is Chihiro's abusive husband, who both physically and sexually assaults her. It's a disturbing movie on a couple different levels and hard to watch at times. It's not gory or bloody, but man, it's intense. The Snow Woman, 1968. If you remember in Tier 1, we covered an anthology film called Kawaii, and one of the shorts was titled The Woman of the Snow. Well, this is basically a feature-length version of that. It's based off of the old Japanese ghost story about a white ghost that appears in the snow, which is one of the oldest yokai tales and has an interesting history because the story changes depending on the region. So in the movie, the Snow Woman, or Yukiona, spares a man's life after he swears to never tell anyone what happened. After this, he meets a beautiful woman who moves to his village. I already explained the whole story in Tier 1, but I'll just say the woman's name is Yuki, so you can kind of see where it's going. Shrill Cries of Summer. Shrill Cries of Summer is mostly a mystery thriller. It follows a high school kid who moves to a small mountain town. He befriends 3 girls from his class, and all seems well until he begins questioning the girls and their involvement in a series of murders that have occurred in the town. It's kind of a slow burn, and that's putting it generously, because not a lot happens until the 3rd act of the movie. There's a couple brutal scenes, including a girl getting her hand shut in a door that looks pretty gross, but overall it's light on the gore. If you're more into the mystery side of horror films, this one might be for you. Psychic Vision Jaganrei. Psychic Vision is a found footage movie, which is actually surprising because it came out in 1988, which means it must have been one of the only notable found footage movies at the time because it wasn't a common style yet. It follows a news reporter who's doing a report on a pop star and her upcoming song and music video. Supernatural occurrences begin happening during production, and it turns out that the woman who composed the song died 7 years ago and is now back as a vengeful ghost. The film reminds me a lot of Notary the Curse, which is actually one of my favorites we've covered on the Iceberg. It's only 49 minutes, so it's kind of a perfect runtime for what it is. It has a good build up and a really cool ending that is executed very well, so it's short and sweet. It's not extremely graphic or anything, but I'll just say shit goes sour when they begin to shoot the music video and a couple of disturbing things happen. The Iron Crown. The Iron Crown is about a woman whose husband leaves her for a younger woman. The husband and his new lover stay in a hotel where they seem to have nothing in common but sex. The wife is now seeking revenge on both of them. The film has an interesting style as it tells a story in both the past, where the characters are represented as mythical archetypes, and the modern day, which is kind of a cool idea. Fatal Frame. The Fatal Frame movie, also known as Zero the movie, is an adaptation of an adaptation. What I mean is that the movie is actually based on a novelization of Fatal Frame the video game. If you're unfamiliar, the Fatal Frame games are a very popular horror series in Japan that some consider in league with Silent Hill, Resident Evil, etc. The games all have similar mechanics, which usually consist of the player character using a camera to identify various ghosts and spiritual entities. The movie has some similar aspects like photography playing a key role, but not at all to the extent of the games. The film is mostly based on a supposed curse. If you kiss a photo of someone you admire at midnight, you'll disappear. Some students try to get to the bottom of this and try to get help from a photographer. This particular photographer keeps photos of a group of lesbian girls who all committed suicide due to intense persecution of the time. Turns out one girl backed out and is said to have been haunted by her lover who went through with it, and this seems to be the catalyst for the curse that's killing off students. Haunted School. Haunted School is more commonly known as School Ghost Stories, which is a direct translation from the Japanese title Gakko no Kaiden. This film has an interesting background. It started with school teacher Toru Tsunemitsu telling ghost stories to his school children. He would tell all different kinds of stories, but it seemed that the ghost stories, especially ones centered around school, were the most common and effective. He eventually asked his students to send him their own ghost stories, and he received over 160. In 1990, the first volume of these stories by Tsunemitsu was released under the title Gakko no Kaiden. The stories were aimed at children and became very popular in Japan, which led to them being adapted into a TV show and then a feature film. It's kind of a fan favorite, and I can see why, because it's got a sort of Stranger Things, Goonies kind of vibe to it. It follows a group of school children who, through various means, all end up in their school after hours. The school is chock full of ghosts, and the kids have to try and get out alive. Compared to some of the more messed up movies we talked about on this iceberg, this one is a lot more lighthearted. It still has its scares and spooky atmosphere, but since it's centered around kids, it never gets too disturbing, so it works as a family film, which I honestly can't say for almost any movie on the iceberg so far. Don't Look Up. Luckily, we're not talking about the 2021 Adam McKay movie. This one's actually good. So Don't Look Up was written and directed by Hideo Nakada, who has actually directed a lot of great movies we've covered on the Berg so far, most notably Ringu. This is actually his debut film, released in 1996. The film follows a director and film crew as they attempt to produce a film, and while scrubbing through the film in the editing bay, the director, Murai, finds that the film is intermingled with some film from a much older movie. He notices a woman in the background of some of the shots, and one particularly disturbing shot, she seems to be laughing maniacally in the blurry background. I actually think this shot is terrifying, but to each his own. As production continues, one of the teen actresses accidentally falls to her death, putting a pause on filming. Murai learns that the underdeveloped film he'd found belongs to a movie that was never released due to the star actress falling to her death during production, and that the film Murai is working on is being produced in the same studio. I think this movie is great because it's a fairly subtle ghost movie and makes the low budget work. Sometimes the camera work and quality almost make it feel like a documentary, which adds to the creepiness without feeling too unprofessional. Some of the scenes I mentioned earlier that freaked me out work so well because there's not a loud dramatic score behind it to help build tension. It's almost pure quiet as he looks through the footage, which I thought was really cool. A Garden Without Birds. This is easily the shortest film on the iceberg so far at only a 22-minute runtime, but it definitely packs in a lot of messed up stuff in that time. The basic premise is that a group of friends decides to have an orgy in a hotel room and even have a dominatrix and her gimp waiting to join the fun. They decide to take some drugs, and from there, it just goes off the rails. I've heard some people say this is basically an anti-drug campaign, and it kind of feels like it. If it is, then damn, Japan doesn't mess around about this kind of stuff. Just so you know what I mean, and because it's so much fun, I'm gonna read the IMDb Parents Guide so you can get an idea of what happens in this movie. A man who's about to have a shower hallucinates and imagines that his hand is a brush and starts painting birds on the wall. In reality, the man has slit his wrists and is painting the walls with his own blood. His corpse is found a few minutes later. A man comes up with the idea to cut up a corpse and flush it down the toilet. A man imagines being shot to death with multiple bloody squibs exploding out of his body. It's implied that someone's heart got cut out, and we can see the heart. A man who's about to slit another man's throat gets stabbed in his head with a corkscrew. The corkscrew gets yanked out of his head with a bit of skull still attached to it. A woman bites another woman's tongue off. A woman gets stabbed in the back of her head. The object exits through her eye. A woman attempts to bring a corpse back to life by using electric wires. A man helps a pregnant woman deliver a baby, and as soon as the child's born, the man makes a fire and and roast the baby. Earlier during the film, a truck could be seen running over a woman's head in slow motion, and her head splatters open like a watermelon. Well, that's one hell of a way to end that tier, holy hell. So let's move into tier 7. And just a heads up, this is where the iceberg really nosedives into obscurity, as you can see from the description, but I tried to get as much info as possible, even if this feels like a speed round. So the tier 7 description reads, logged by less than 250 on Letterboxd, no films in this section have had a release outside of Asia. Starting with Nuns That Bite. I mean, what a name. This is another Pinku film, which is basically the softcore porn trend that was rampant throughout the 70s in Japan. It's technically in a subgenre called nunsploitation, which once again I have to say is the funniest title of any film genre. Anyway, the film follows a woman on the run who is assaulted, rescued, and then assaulted again. Escaping a second time, she finds a safe haven at a convent. After becoming a postulant, which is a trainee nun, she catches her fellow sisters engaging in lesbianism, fighting over nothing, hurling snakes at each other, and engaging in mild flesh eating. Yeah, I guess that's where the biting comes in. So it's kind of a combination of several different fetishes, but I'm sure there's one person out there that's like, hey, this movie's made for me. Alone in the Night. Basically, an undercover narcotics officer is killed, and after his funeral, some Yakuza break into his apartment and his wife, Nami, while looking for the drugs they claim he stole from them. Afterwards, Nami decides she's gonna hunt down the gang members in a bloody revenge tale. Cruel Ghost Legend. This one is interesting because it's essentially lost media. Technically, it's been found because someone did get a hold of the VHS copy that supposedly released in 1990, but there's essentially no way to watch it, and all we know about it is its synopsis, which states that the film is about a blood curse that leads to numerous bloody deaths, incest, a ghostly manifestation, and ultimately suicide. So this one could be interesting, especially since it originally ran in theaters in 1968 and could possibly be one of the earliest slasher gorefest films. The Inferno. Inferno, released in 79, is apparently a remake of Jigoku. I think Jigoku was way back on tier 1 of this iceberg, but it was actually a really cool movie that had an insane depiction of hell, considering the film was made in the 60s. This one follows similar themes and is based around a daughter born right after her mother's murder who avenges her mother by spreading sin among the culprits and their loved ones. In doing so, she can take them all back to hell to suffer for eternity. It's similar to the original Jigoku in the sense that it's a fairly slow movie up until the last 20 minutes or so when we actually see hell. If you're a fan of Jigoku, this one's worth checking out as well. A Haunted Turkish Bathhouse. Yet another Pinku film. This one doesn't have any nuns, but it does have whores. It's basically about a gangster who plots against his own wife, who works at a brothel/bathhouse with the help of the bathhouse owner's wife. There's a lot of sex and violence and all that stuff, very similar to all the other Pinku films I've covered. There is a bit of a twist when a vengeful ghost ends up killing the dude at the end in a truly brutal way. His stomach is slashed open, so his intestines are hanging outside of his body. The ghost then bites his neck, which sprays blood before he's burned alive. Pretty rad. Also, this has nothing to do with anything, but I thought it was weird that in the plot summary for this movie, the brothel is described as brothel cum bathhouse. I don't know if that's a bad translation or someone doing a bit, or if cum bathhouse is actually a thing, but it made me laugh, so I had to mention it. Curse of the Dog God. Curse of the Dog God follows a man who's looking for uranium in a rural Japanese village. Him and his crew accidentally run over a child's dog, which they leave to die as the boy sadly cries over its body. This all leads up to an epic climax when the Dog God takes the form of a woman who hunts the man down using supernatural strength and movement. Lullaby to Kill. A somewhat peculiar private detective, Kosuke Kindaichi, visits a remote town. He meets a local police detective, and the two start to investigate an old unsolved murder. In the process, a string of new murders begins. Kindaichi must find out about the past in order to reveal about the murderer in the present. Apparently, Kosuke Kindaichi is a famous detective character in Japan, being in over 80 novels. Bakeneko, a vengeful spirit. Bakeneko is an interesting term. It basically means cat spirit and is a yokai, or more specifically a kaibyo, which means supernatural cat. Just thought it was cool that there was a separate and specific name for that. The basic premise of the movie is that a vassal kills his lord and the lord's wife kills herself along with her cat in order to avoid marrying the guy. If you're wondering what a vassal is, so was I. So it's a person in the Middle Ages who received protection and land from a lord in return for loyalty and service. Anyway, the woman comes back with the spirit of the cat as a vengeful ghost to get revenge. The Lakeside Murder Case. 3 couples are staying at a lakeside cottage with their children. They want them to prepare intensely for a prestigious high school's entrance exam with the help of a private tutor. It's basically a whodunit, but without a detective character, so it's purely amateur non-killers trying to find out who the murderer is. From what I've heard, it's got a strong moral moral about parents being too tough on their children that's a little on the nose. Haunted Castle. This is another film based off of an old folk tale, specifically Nabeshima Bakeneko, or Monster Cat of Nabeshima. Basically, a warlord kills his opponent after a game of Go, and a freaking werecat is summoned for revenge. It's non-stop cat kills from there. Tsuburo. This is a really strange one. Tsuburo has a very simple plot, if you want to call it that. A man and a woman wake up in a hospital room. The woman is a nurse and the man has a large metal contraption on his back. So from what I understand, the entire movie takes place in this room, and as the nurse attempts to escape, the man is caught in between his dreams and reality, which leads to some really strange images. Apparently most of the movie is just them having a very vague conversation that's completely up to interpretation. Some people have compared it to Saw, and I kind of understand that because of the cinematography and the metal contraption, but there really isn't any gore in this film, and it's notoriously slow moving. It seems people view this one more unfavorably than not, citing it as just boring and vague, but I feel like it might be one of those movies you just need to watch late at night and let your brain sink into it. Perfect Blue, 2002. Perfect Blue is more or less a live-action remake of the anime movie of the same name. I guess technically it's not an adaptation of the same novel as the anime, but instead an adaptation of one of the sequel short stories titled Perfect Blue Wake Me From This Dream. So it has some differences, but overall it's the same themes with crazy stalkers and the main character slowly losing their mind. Difficulty Breathing. This is about a woman who suffers a violent attack and locks herself in her apartment as we watch her insanity unfold. The real horror of this film and its strength is how effective the movie is at showcasing anxiety. Someone knocking on the door or even a phone call seems terrifying in this movie thanks to the sound design. If you've ever suffered from severe anxiety or agoraphobia, this movie will probably be relatable and horrifying. The Ghost Cat and the Mysterious Shamisen. So Bakeneko, aka ghost cats, are just super common in Japan, I guess. This is another ghostly revenge tale. Basically, there's a stage theater actress named Mitsue who is in love with a shamisen player named Shizuru. A shamisen, by the way, is a stringed instrument originating in Japan. It's kind of like a skinny guitar or mandolin, something like that. Anyway, Seijiro unfortunately has the hots for another girl named Okio, and of course he's got the pick of the litter. I mean, the dude plays shamisen, so you know he gets poontang. So Mitsue, out of rageful jealousy, kills Okio and Kuro the cat, which the guy apparently loves. Why'd she have to kill the cat too? It's not like he's trying to bone the cat. So now the spirits of Okio and Kuro then merge into a vengeful ghost. It's interesting that the concept of human/cat ghost mergers are such a common theme in Japan and basically have their own subgenre. Death at an Old Mansion. Man, this must be the murder mystery tier, so this is another whodunit, although it's got an interesting setup, which is that instead of one obvious murder, the mystery is about a bride and groom who are found dead in a double suicide the day after their wedding. Was it really a suicide, and why kill yourselves right after getting married? Well, that's what the movie's trying to find out. The War of the 16-Year-Olds. I can only find vague descriptions of this movie as it has no English subtitles, but from what I gather, it's basically a love story about two teens. However, the film takes place in Toyokawa, which was famously hit by an air raid in 1945, killing 2,000 people. So I think while this romance is going on, they're also dealing with ghosts from the event. I could be way off, but the two things I know for sure is that teenagers are smooching and the film is a commentary on the ghosts of wartime past. Writhing Tongue. Writhing Tongue is a different kind of horror. There's no ghosts or demons, no bloody killers, and no freakish mutations. It's simply about a little girl who cuts her finger in a marsh and gets some kind of disease that causes her to suffer immense pain, including horrible spasms that cause her to bite her own tongue. People have said it's pretty hard to watch as the little girl has to deal with rectal anesthetics, tubes going up her nostrils, gunk being pumped from organs, and fingernails being jabbed at. The real horror, and what I believe the film is conveying, is the trials and tribulations of being a parent. It's heartbreaking seeing them be forced to watch as their daughter must deal with all this, and it definitely makes you more sympathetic to parents and children going through similar situations in real life. Well, there you have it, tier 6 and 7. I hope you've all been enjoying this iceberg. As I said, there are a lot of weird hidden gems on these bottom tiers, so stay tuned for the next two tiers. I want to give a big shout out to my patrons, Naomi Romero, Soma, Krusty the Crab, One Group, Ali Morgan, Laz Wishgender, Malediction, Hunter Piva, Tora, Heather M, Creepypasta Cube, A Slightly Bigger Ant, Hannah Broadstreet, K.A., Ricky Shadow, Chase Middleton, Koei Kohi, Matt Rozak, and Momomochi. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for all the support. If you want a shout out like that at the end of every video, as well as bonus videos and a grief sticker, consider joining the Patreon. But I appreciate you guys watching at all, so thank you. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.
I can't